My name is Naina Kapoor. I am 27 years old. I run a small business that most of my family cannot describe, and I found out my sister had been telling everyone I was a failure on the same night I realized I'd been secretly funding her entire career for 2 years. Let me explain that, because it's the whole story. My sister Simran is 4 years older than me, and she works at a marketing agency, a real office, a real title, business cards, the whole thing my family understood and respected. I, on the other hand, run a small e-commerce brand out of my apartment. I import and sell a specific kind of home product, I do it well, and I do it quietly. My family has never once understood it. To them, I sell stuff online, which in our family's vocabulary sits somewhere between unemployment and a hobby. My mother tells relatives that Simran is in marketing and that I'm still finding my footing, and I have been finding my footing, apparently, for 6 years and counting. The thing my family didn't know, the thing that turned out to be the entire hinge of my life, is that my quiet little online brand had grown. A lot. Enough that 18 months earlier I'd started spending real money on marketing, and I'd hired an agency to run my ad campaigns, and that agency was good, and I'd scaled up my spend with them steadily until I was, by their own account, one of their most important accounts. The agency was Simran's agency. And the account manager whose numbers made her look like a star, whose client kept increasing spend, whose retention made Simran's whole team look good to the partners, that client was me. She didn't know. That's the part one need you to sit with. My sister had spent 2 years building her reputation at that agency partly on the back of an account she didn't know belonged to her own little sister, the sister she described at family dinners as the one who sells stuff online and can't hold down a real job. I found out she'd been saying that at a dinner, the way you find out most family truths, by accident. I'd stepped out to take a call, and I came back to the hallway outside the dining room, and I heard my sister mid-sentence, telling our aunt, warm and laughing, "Naina? Oh, she's still doing her little freelance thing. I keep telling Mom, at some point she has to grow up and get a real job. I could probably even get her an interview at my agency, entry level, if she'd stop being so proud about it." Entry level. At her agency. The agency I was one of the biggest clients of. I did not walk in and announce it. I have learned that the person who reacts is the person who hands the room the power, and I was not going to hand it to Simran. I went back to the table and I ate my dinner and I said nothing. Because my sister had made one enormous mistake, and she made it because she'd spent her whole life certain that I was the lost one, too small and too directionless to ever be anything she'd need to reckon with. She didn't know that the biggest number on her own performance review had my name behind it. She didn't know that the little freelance thing she wanted to get me an entry-level interview for was, quietly, one of her agency's best accounts. She didn't know that she worked for me, and had for 2 years, and never once realized it. Before I tell you what happened when my agency assigned Simran to personally manage my account, not knowing it was mine, and what I chose to do when I finally held every card, tell me what time it is where you are right now, and whether you've ever been called a failure by someone who was quietly depending on you. I want to see how far this story travels. I have to explain what I actually do, because the gap between what I do and what my family thinks I do is the whole engine of this story. I run a direct-to-consumer brand. I found a product category I understood, I sourced it well, I built a brand around it, and I sell it online. That's it. It is not glamorous to explain at a family dinner. There's no office you can visit, no title on a card, no boss whose name my mother can drop to relatives. When people ask what I do and I say I have an online store, their eyes do a specific thing, they glaze, and then they get gently sympathetic, as if I've admitted to something that isn't quite working out. In my family, a job is a place you go and a boss you report to. A business you run alone from a laptop, no matter how well it does, reads is not yet a real job. And here's the thing I learned to do about that, the thing that turned out to matter, I stopped explaining. Early on I used to try, I'd talk about revenue, about growth, about margins, and I'd watch it not land, watch my family decide I was either exaggerating or talking about monopoly money. So I stopped. I let them think what they thought. I discovered that there is a strange freedom in being underestimated. Nobody watches the person they've written off, and nobody watched me. And so nobody noticed when the quiet online store started doing numbers that would have silenced the whole table if I'd ever bothered to say them out loud. My family found my silence confirming. To them, a person doing well would talk about it, would perform it, the way Simran performed her agency job, the titles and the client wins and the office drama recounted like episodes of a show everyone was supposed to care about. My quietness read as embarrassment. As failure I was too proud to admit. My mother once told me, gently, that it was okay to ask for help and offered to have Simran look at my resume, and I said thank you, and I did not tell her that I employed more people, indirectly, than my sister ever would. I remember the exact moment the business stopped being small, and it happened in total silence, with nobody in my family aware of it. I was 24, sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and a product I'd bet almost everything on sold out in a weekend, and I sat there refreshing the orders and understanding that the thing everyone thought was a hobby had just become the thing that would define my life. I didn't call anyone. There was no one in my family who would have understood what the number on my screen meant. So I made myself a cup of tea and sat with it alone, this enormous private thing, and I think that night taught me the shape of my whole life to come. That I would build something real in a silence my family mistook for failure, and that the silence would be lonely, and that it would also be the exact thing that let it grow. I want to be fair, because fairness is the whole point of this story. Simran was not a villain. She was a woman who'd been handed the family's definition of success, the office, the title, the respectable career, and who had built her entire sense of self on being the one who'd made it, in contrast to the little sister who hadn't. She needed me to be the failure, because I was the measuring stick that made her a success. If I wasn't lost, what was she the found one against? Her contempt for my little freelance thing wasn't really about me. It was the load-bearing wall of her own self-image. And she built it, without knowing, directly on top of the one account that was quietly making her look good at work. There were 3 moments I never let myself feel until that night made me feel all of them at once. When I was 22 and told the family I was going to build an online business instead of taking the office job I'd been offered, Simran laughed and said, "So, professional Instagram scroller," and my mother said I'd come around eventually. When I was 24 and quietly paid off a chunk of my parents' debt, routed carefully so they'd never trace it to me, Simran spent that whole year telling relatives how she'd been helping mom and dad out, and I let her. Because correcting it would have meant explaining money I didn't want to explain. And when I was 26 and hit a revenue milestone that would have stunned my family, I mentioned, carefully, that the business was going really well, and Simran said, at the dinner table, "That's what you said last year," and everyone laughed, and I laughed too, because that was the price of a seat. Each one was warm on the surface. That was the trap of it. Each one told me exactly where I was supposed to stay, beneath her, the cautionary tale, the sister who sells stuff online, and I stayed there for years, because correcting it felt like bragging and bragging felt ugly and I was the easygoing one who didn't need to be seen. Then my own agency, not knowing what it was doing, assigned my sister to manage my account. And the ground shifted under both of us, and only I could feel it move. Here is how it happened, and the order matters. I'd been with the agency for a year and a half. My account had grown enough that they moved it up to a more senior team for strategic accounts, and there was a reshuffle, and one day I got an email introducing my new dedicated account manager, and the name on the email was my sister's. I read it 4 times. Simran Kapoor. Her work email, her title, her little headshot in the signature. My sister was now, officially, the person responsible for managing the advertising account of the business she called my little freelance thing. She was going to be sending me strategy decks. She was going to be on calls with me, except she didn't know it was me, because to the agency I was my brand, my business email, a company name that gave nothing away. She had no idea her new top client was her baby sister. I actually laughed out loud, alone in my apartment, one short disbelieving sound, because the universe does not usually arrange its ironies this neatly. For 6 years my sister had been the family's proof that I'd failed and she'd succeeded. And now a piece of paper was telling me she'd been assigned, by her own employer, to serve me, to answer to my account, to make me happy or lose me. The hierarchy my whole family took as gospel, accomplished Simran and lost Naina, had just been quietly, bureaucratically inverted, and I was the only person on earth who could see it. I want to tell you I immediately came up with a plan. I didn't. I sat with it for days, genuinely unsure what to do, because I realized I was holding something enormous and I didn't yet know what kind of person I wanted to be while holding it. Because think about what I actually had. I was Simran's client. Not just a client, a major one, the kind whose spend and retention shape an account manager's whole standing. I could increase my spend and make her a hero. I could pull my account and put a serious dent in her numbers. I could sit on a call and listen to my sister present marketing strategy to me, the failure, the one she wanted to get an entry-level interview for, never knowing she was pitching to the person who signed the checks that made her look good. I had, without ever seeking it, complete power over the career of the person who'd spent my whole life calling me lost. And I'd heard her, 3 weeks earlier, in that hallway. Her little freelance thing. Get a real job. Entry level, if she'd stop being so proud. I want you to understand what those words did, standing in that hallway, because it wasn't simple anger. It was a very old, very specific ache. Entry level. My sister looked at the thing I'd built, the thing that quietly employed people, that paid her agency more in a month than she probably made in 3, and the most generous thing she could imagine for me was the bottom rung of her own ladder. Not because she was cruel, exactly. Because she genuinely could not conceive that the little sister might be standing on a higher rung already, in a building she didn't know existed. That's the thing about being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best. It isn't that they think less of you. It's that they've stopped being able to see you at all, and they've mistaken the blank space where you used to be for the measure of how small you are. I took the first call as my company. Not as her sister, as the client. I let her present to me. And here is the thing I did not expect, she was good. Not to me, not personally, she didn't know it was me. But at the actual work, she was genuinely competent. She'd clearly studied my account. She came in prepared, sharp, with real ideas, and she presented them well, and I sat there listening to my sister be professionally excellent at the exact moment I'd expected to catch her being a fraud. It complicated everything. Because the story I'd been carrying into that call was simple. My sister is a phony who looks down on me and I finally have the power to expose her, and the reality on the call was Messier. She wasn't a phony. She was good at her job. She'd just built her sense of being good at her job partly on my account, and she'd spent years being cruel about me at dinner, and both of those things were true at the same time, and I had to figure out what to do with a person who was both genuinely competent and genuinely unkind. We had several calls over the following weeks. I stayed the client. I watched her work. And slowly I understood something that reframed the whole thing. Simran had no idea her biggest client was her sister, but she also had no idea that the account she was most proud of, the one she bragged about to the partners, was built by the failure of the family. She was, every single day, professionally staking her reputation on my competence while personally telling our relatives I had none. She'd split me in two without knowing it, the impressive client she needed, and the loser sister she needed to look down on. And they were the same person. There was a particular call I keep thinking about. She was walking me, the client, she thought, some stranger who owned a growing brand, through a strategy for the next quarter, and at one point she said, with real warmth, honestly, working on this account has been the best part of my year. Whoever built this business really knew what they were doing. She was praising me to my face and had no idea. I had spent my whole life waiting to hear my sister say something like that, and when it finally came, it came by accident, to a stranger she didn't know was me. I had to mute myself for a second. Because it turned out the person whose respect I'd been quietly starving for my entire life was capable of giving it. She just could only give it to a version of me she couldn't recognize as her little sister. Here is where the story becomes a choice, and it is not the choice my family expected, and it is probably not the one you'd expect either. Because I had all of it. I could have revealed myself on a call, in the most humiliating way possible, let her finish a polished presentation and then say, "Great work, Simran. It's me. Naina. Your little freelance failure sister. I've been signing your paychecks for 2 years." I could have pulled my entire account the week of her performance review and watched her numbers collapse and her standing with it. I could have gone to the partners and let them know, casually, that their star account manager had been publicly calling their major client a failure at family dinners. Any of those would have detonated her career, and after 27 years of being the family's cautionary tale, every one of them had a pull to it I won't pretend I didn't feel. I thought about it. For a couple of weeks, I thought about very little else, because the anger I'd been swallowing for years finally had somewhere it could go. I even picked the moment, in my head. Her agency did quarterly reviews, and I knew from a stray comment on a call that hers was coming up, and I knew that if I paused my spend for even 2 weeks around that review, her best account would show a dip at the exact moment the partners were deciding her raise. It would have been so easy. A single email to the agency, pausing campaigns to reassess, nothing anyone could trace to malice, just a client doing client things, and my sister's big quarter would quietly deflate right when it counted most. I sat with that email half-written for 3 days. I never sent it. Because every time I imagined the satisfaction of it, I also imagined the person I'd be afterward, someone who'd learned, from this exact family, that the way you handle love that didn't show up is to withhold it from someone weaker the second you get the chance. I did not want to be one more person at that table who fed on someone else's smallness. But I kept asking myself what I actually wanted underneath the anger, and it wasn't Simran's ruin. It was to stop being invisible to my own family. And here's what I slowly understood, destroying her wouldn't make me visible. It would just make me the villain, and it would confirm, in the family story, that I was bitter and vengeful, and it would take a genuinely talented person and break her career to soothe a wound that breaking her wouldn't actually heal. The craving to watch her fall and the need to finally be seen were two different things, and I was, even at 27, old enough to tell them apart. And there was something else, quieter, that decided it. I'd listened to my sister be good at her job for weeks. And somewhere in there my anger had gotten complicated by an unwelcome fact. I was a little proud of her. She was sharp. She was talented. She just never had anyone in the family be proud of her out loud either, because in our family the currency was performance, and performers don't get seen, they get compared. We were both starving for the same thing. She just found a crueler way to cope with the hunger than I had. So I did the thing I actually wanted to do, which was neither to expose her nor to keep hiding. I told her the truth, privately, on my terms, without an audience. I asked for a call, camera on, no agency staff, and when she joined and saw my face where her clients should be, I watched her whole understanding of the last 2 years rearrange itself in real time. She said, "Naina? What are you?" And then she stopped, because she was reading the company name on the account, and the pieces were landing, one after another, and I watched her face go from confusion to disbelief to something that looked a lot like horror. "You're the client," she said. This account is yours. This is your business." And I said, quietly, "It's been mine the whole time. 18 months. I'm the account you've been telling the partners about. The one that made your quarter." She didn't say anything for a long moment. And then, because Simran was Simran and the reflex ran deep, she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And there was an accusation in it, like I'd tricked her, like the deception was mine. And I said the sentence I'd say again exactly the same way. I said, "Because 3 weeks ago I heard you tell Aunt Mira I was still doing my little freelance thing and needed to grow up and get a real job. You offered to get me an entry-level interview. At the agency where I'm one of the biggest clients. I didn't tell you, Simran, because you spent 2 years being ashamed of me while I was quietly making you look good at work, and you never once wondered whether the sister you were embarrassed by might be someone worth actually asking about. She cried. And it wasn't the performing kind. I knew her performing kind, and this wasn't it. She said, I didn't know. And I said, I know you didn't. That's the whole point. You decided what I was without ever looking. And she was quiet, and then she said the truest thing she's ever said to me. I needed you to be the one who didn't make it. I don't know who I am if you're not the one who didn't make it. And there it was, the whole architecture of us, said out loud for the first time. My sister hadn't looked down on me because I was beneath her. She'd needed me beneath her because she didn't know how to be okay any other way. Her contempt was a scaffold holding up a person who'd never been told, by anyone in our family, that she was enough on her own. And I recognized it, because I had been starving at the same table. Our family never praised anyone for who they were, only for how they ranked. You weren't good, you were better than or worse than. Simran had survived that by making sure there was always someone below her, and the someone was me, and it had nothing to do with whether I'd actually succeeded. She would have needed me to be the failure even if I'd cured a disease. It was never about my life. It was about the empty place in hers that our parents had never filled, and that she'd learned to fill, badly, with the smallness of her sister. Here is where I made the choice that I think actually mattered, more than any revenge would have. I did not pull my account. I did not go to the partners. I did not tell the family in some triumphant reveal. What I did was keep her as my account manager, because she was good, and because the work was genuinely strong, and because I am not in the business of setting fire to a talented person to prove a point. My business kept making her look good. Except now she knew whose business it was. Now every strong quarter she posted was one she and I both knew had been built by the sister she'd spent years being ashamed of. That knowledge did more than any exposure could have. I didn't need to humble her. The truth had already done it, quietly, permanently, in a way that let her keep her career and her dignity while losing forever the story where I was the failure. People sometimes ask if it was hard, staying her client after that, sitting on calls with the sister who'd wanted to get me an entry-level interview, letting her keep running the account that made her look good. It wasn't hard, actually. It was the easiest decision in the whole thing. Because the alternative, pulling the account and ending her, would have cost me nothing I valued and would have made me into something I didn't want to be. Keeping her cost me nothing either, and it let me be the person my praise-starved family had never once managed to produce, someone who had real power over another person and chose to be gentle with it. That choice was the whole inheritance I got to hand myself. The 18 months after that were not dramatic. That's the part these stories never show. Simran managed my account for another year, and she was excellent at it, and something strange and good happened. Freed from the need to see me as the cautionary tale, she actually started to know me. We'd get on calls that would start as client manager and drift into just being sisters, and for the first time in our adult lives she asked me questions about how I'd built the business, real questions, the kind you ask someone you've decided to respect. She stopped telling relatives I was finding my footing. She started, awkwardly at first, telling them her sister ran a really successful e-commerce brand, and I heard, secondhand, that the first time she said it she got the details slightly wrong, and I decided that was the most touching thing she could have done, because it meant she was bragging about something she still didn't fully understand, just because it was mine. There was one call, a few months after she found out, that told me things had truly changed. It started as a normal account review, and halfway through she stopped and said, "Can I ask you something not as your account manager?" And I said sure. And she asked how I'd known which product to bet on, back at the start, a real question, a curious one, the kind you ask someone you've decided is worth learning from. I answered her for 20 minutes. She listened to all of it. And at the end she said, quietly, "I could have been asking you this for 6 years." And I said, "Yeah. You could have." And neither of us made it a fight, because we were both too busy being surprised by how much we actually liked talking to each other once she'd put the ranking down. My mother took the longest, because she had the most to unbuild. Her whole map of her daughters, the one in marketing, the one still finding her footing, did not survive learning that the lost one had employed the found one for 2 years without either of them knowing. For a while she just couldn't hold it. Then one Sunday she said, "I kept offering to have Simran fix your resume." And I said I remembered. And she said, "You never corrected me. Why didn't you ever correct me?" And I said, "Because I stopped needing you to be right about me. I just wish it hadn't taken this for you to look." It wasn't a fight. It was my mother realizing she'd spent 6 years feeling sorry for the most successful person at her own dinner table. She's asked me actual questions about my work since. She gets the details wrong too. I've decided to find it lovely. And Simran and I are, genuinely, closer than we have ever been, not because she apologized in a clean sentence, though she eventually did, but because she knows I had every card and chose not to play a single one against her. And there is a specific kind of trust that only grows between two people when one of them could have destroyed the other and simply, deliberately, didn't. People ask me whether it was revenge. I didn't expose anyone. I didn't pull an account to tank a career, or humiliate my sister in front of the partners, or announce anything at a family dinner. I didn't do a single one of the things the setup seems to promise. Simran did the belittling. Her own words in that hallway did the damage, and the truth, once she finally saw it, did all the rest, without my having to lift a hand. All I did was refuse to use what I held as a weapon. I was the client the whole time. I could have been the client who ended her. I chose to be the client who let her keep the career she was good at, while quietly taking back the only thing I actually wanted, which was the end of the story where I was the one who didn't make it. Here is what everybody lost. Simran lost the story, the one where she was the success and I was the sister still finding her footing. She lost it the day she saw my face where her top clients should have been. But she gained a sister she can actually see, and the knowledge that when she was completely in my power, I protected her, and that's a better thing to have than the story ever was. My mother lost the tidy map of her 2 daughters, and she's the only one still, slowly and honestly, redrawing it. And I lost something too, and it wasn't Simran. I lost the belief that if I just kept quiet and did the work and let them underestimate me long enough, my family would eventually look up and see what I'd built. They never looked up on their own. It took 2 years of secretly signing my own sister's paychecks before anyone in my family finally understood that the lost one had, the entire time, known exactly where she was going. I keep the very first invoice from the agency on my desk now. Not a revenue report, though I have plenty of those. The first invoice, the one from before I knew my sister would ever be attached to the account, back when it was just me, quietly hiring good people to grow a thing my family couldn't see. Because that invoice is the thing that was actually true. My family could call it a little freelance thing, could offer to get me an entry-level interview, could feel sorry for me across the dinner table. They could not, in the end, argue with the fact that the failure of the family was the one signing the checks that made the success look successful. They thought I was the one who never made it. It turned out I was the one quietly holding up the person they were all so proud of. So if there's someone in your life who needs you to be the failure, who's built their whole sense of themselves on being more than you, and who'd be lost if you turned out to be doing just fine, ask yourself one thing tonight. Are you actually the one who didn't make it? Or have you quietly become the thing the whole family is standing on, without a single one of them knowing it's you holding them up? Thank you for staying with this story to the end. Every character and event in it is fictional, written for reflection and entertainment. But if any of it felt familiar, I hope it leaves you with this: the quiet one, the one they've all decided is still figuring it out, is sometimes the one who figured it out first and simply stopped needing applause for it. Being underestimated isn't a verdict on you. It's a blind spot in them. And what you build in that blind spot, quietly, while nobody's watching, can turn out to be the very thing the people who overlooked you are standing on, which means the choice of whether to hold them up, or let them fall, was always going to be yours. Choose it as the person you actually want to be. That choice, in the end, is the only real success there is.